Welcome to the Animation Happy Hour,
a podcast where we talk about breaking into the animation industry over a couple of drinks.
All opinions and views expressed in this podcast are solely our own and are not representative of the companies for whom we work. My name is Garrett.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Katie, and we are all currently feature film animators at Disney. So today we are drinking actually quite a variety of drinks, right?
That's right.
Ben and I are drinking Dark and Stories.
Yes, I love that one. Which thank you so much. Once again, we put out the call for drink names, and you guys did not disappoint. So first to Demi Chen, thank you so much. Demi.draw. She came up with Dark and Story
as well
with
as,
my gosh, there was at least one other. Great minds think alike.
I think it was Animate Illustrate.
Yes, you're right.
On Instagram.
Yep, Animate Illustrate T had that one and another Between the Story Beats instead of Between the Sheets.
Is that a cocktail? Between the Sheets?
I was wondering.
It's just a phrase.
It's real suggestive.
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing.
But yeah, there were great ones. We also have, I believe, a couple of our listeners are enjoying some Storyboard.
Or a couple of our guests.
Our guests, not listeners. Well, they're listening right now.
Maybe our listeners, too.
That's right. Storyboard wine. That's by Ryan Rosendale. And I think a couple other people said that, too. So unprofessional, not to know their names off the top of my head. But thank you so much.
Whoever you were.
To all those that, And before
establishment shots?
That's right. Establishing shot. Right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. What did I say? Establishment?
Garrett's already had a couple establishing shots. So
perfect. You were just going to say. Yeah.
I did. That was such a good one, though. That's great. All these are so clever.
Yeah, thank you to David Stodoni for that one, our former guest.
Oh, man.
Yes. Shout out to David.
So today we are super excited to continue our pipeline series with a day in the life of a story artist. So we're talking all things story, like what skills do you need to get hired, what your day-to-day is like, what are the different levels within the story department, and also how it differs between feature and TV. This has been a very hot topic. We've gotten a lot of listener engagement about this one because so many people are interested in storyboarding, and we really are excited about this episode. And we have very, very exciting guests, which I think Katie's going to talk about. Or Ben.
But first, I'm going to hop in here before we get to Katie. Okay. We're just going to bury that lead a little more for you. But that's right, Garrett. And before we get to meet our wonderful guests, which Katie will handle, we wanted to give a quick disclaimer that although this talk will be fairly specific to how things work at Disney feature and TV animation, the responsibilities and skill sets of story artists are fairly consistent across all of the major feature film and TV animation studios. So we hope that this will be universally helpful for all of you listeners out there who are interested in story.
So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our two very special guests for today. A big animation happy hour welcome to Isabelle Gedigk and Natalie Nourigat.
Yay! Hi. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. Yes, we thought it would be especially helpful for our listeners to learn about both TV and feature storyboarding. So we have invited Isabelle to chat about her experience with TV and Natalie to share her experience with feature. And we would love to begin with brief introductions for you both and help our listeners get to know you. So we can start with just, the very basic questions. How did you get into story for animation, and what sorts of projects have you worked on so far? Basically, your background and resume. So we can begin with Isabelle.
Yeah. So, hi. I'm so excited to be here and talk about story. Thanks for having me. So my background into story isn't that straightforward. I went to New York University. Originally, it's actually where I met Garrett, but I didn't start in the film school, which is where you can study animation. I went to the arts and sciences school, and I very much had no idea what I wanted to do with my life or what I wanted to major in or study. But I kind of always loved to draw growing up. That was just something that I always liked to do for fun. So as an elective, I decided to take an animation class because that just sounded like a lot of fun. And it totally changed my life. It changed the course of what I really wanted to do. So I ended up transferring over to the film school to study animation. I think it was in my junior year. So I spent kind of just the last 2 years studying animation at NYU. And that's kind of how I got into animation. And then after that, I lived in New York for about a year, and I worked at Titmouse as an animation cleanup artist. But that whole time I knew kind of that I really wanted to get into storyboarding. So I worked on my portfolio while I was working that job. And after about a year, I realized that a lot of the jobs that I was interested in, a lot of the storyboarding jobs I was interested in were in LA. So that was, I was seeing Garrett at the time.
I'm pretty sure you were the one who like convinced me to go to LA.
Yes.
I was not initially going to come here. The
way it went was you asked me to move in with you, and I was like, yes. But in LA. So I kind of just like upped the ante with you.
Nice. And
worked out.
Yeah, exactly. And luckily you agreed, and I did agree. We did a cross-country road trip together to break into animation in LA, and ever since then, I think I started out as a character designer. That was kind of the first job I got in animation, and then after that, a couple of months in, I got my first storyboarding job in TV animation, and have been in TV animation ever since. So yeah, That's my story.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. And Natalie, now your background and resume.
Thanks for having me. So I was one of those kids that always loved to draw, and I wanted to be a professional artist, but didn't really know what that looked like. And, my parents were like, are you sure? Because we've read about, what happens to artists, and I don't know if that's a real job. So when it came time to choose a college, I wanted to go to art school, but I didn't know if there was going to be a job on the other side of it, and I was scared to go into debt. So I went to a state school. I'm from Oregon, and the University of Oregon is a great, liberal arts college. I studied Japanese because I love languages and I wanted to travel. And I studied business because I wanted a job when I graduated, but I did not like that at all. Although that info has continued to be really helpful. So I graduated with a double major in business and Japanese. But right before I graduated, I had my first offer to draw a graphic novel. And that gave me the confidence to jump into a freelance art career right after school.
Wow.
So I moved back to Portland, where my family's from. And I started working on this graphic novel. I did commissions of people's pets. I did draw my kid as the Flash. You got it, buddy. And made ends meet for a few years. I started working at a studio that I had interned at, Helioscope Studio, which is for comic book artists. And they taught me how to be a freelance artist and how to do freelancer taxes and all this stuff, how to interact with clients. And because of them, I got to see all of these other professional artists running their different businesses. And a few of them were making really good money storyboarding for advertising agencies in Portland. And I was like, oh, how can I get in on that? And they were like, we'll teach you. So they let me maybe color some of the work that they were doing. And then eventually they let me come to the client meetings and maybe take half of the project. And eventually when they were too busy, they'd be like, I can't, but my buddy Natalie can do it. So I built my commercial storyboarding portfolio that way. And that gave me a lot more financial freedom to start looking around at what else I wanted to do. So I'm sorry, I feel like this is long. I've got a long story.
Oh, no worries.
No.
I didn't break in until I was 28, and I wandered quite a bit.
This is so interesting.
Yeah, that's very similar to my own story, so no worries at all.
I don't regret wandering. I like coming into the studio system and having all of these past experiences and these other weird jobs that I had. My first job out of college was actually working at the Oregon Zoo as a camp counselor.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so where was I? Okay. I'm commercial storyboarding, and I'm really interested in working in animation, but I don't actually know anybody who works in animation. I don't know how to do that. I didn't go to school for that, so I kind of feel like, well, that's probably never going to happen, you know. But then people that I knew who also didn't have animation degrees from the Portland comic scene, they started moving down to LA and working on Adventure Time and Nickelodeon shows. And there just seemed to be this door opening, like there was more work and people were open to the idea of a comics background leading to story. So that was like, I saw people doing that and I got to ask them, you know, how did you do this? What should I do? They gave me tips. And it took a long time. I was like taking online classes and trying to read about storyboarding and taking tests for about a year. And finally got into the Disney Story Apprenticeship in 2015 and have been there ever since.
Wow. That's so cool that you came in. I like that you came in through kind of graphic novels and the commercial side and came in through that way. It's neat.
I think that was how we met too. We were both at Disney orientation the very first day.
Yes, we were like
so I remember that.
Twinsies. They do the big orientation for like everyone in the company that's starting. So you could be TV, feature, like finance, anything. And that's so fun. We started at the same time.
I remember that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Could you two possibly go over a little bit of your kind of some of the things you've worked on, like some of the different shows you've been on up until now?
Yeah, sure. I can go first, I guess. But so the very first TV storyboarding job I got was actually at this small stop motion animation studio in LA called Bix Pix Entertainment.
Oh, I know.
Oh, wow.
And it was honestly, that was kind of, I'm really happy I worked there. It was one of my favorite jobs, and it was just such a great job to kind of get like introduced into the world of storyboarding because everything was in-house. So I got to see the work that I did several weeks or months down the line being created in the puppet fabrication department and then in the set designs and then eventually animation, which was super fun and magical. So I really had a great time working there. And then right after that was my very first job at Disney TV Animation, which is where I've been ever since. And I started on The Lion Guard, which is a spin-off series of The Lion King, which was a huge dream come true.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's everybody's favorite Disney movie growing up. I feel like it's
so good.
But yeah, and I think it really worked with me because I really love drawing animals. I really love drawing creatures much more than I like drawing humans. So it was kind of just this great like way to get introduced into the company with something that meant a lot to me. And I think, and this might reveal my age too much, but I think it's apparently the very first movie that my parents ever took me to as a kid in the movie theater. So it felt very much like a circle of life, to make a cheesy joke.
Dang.
But yeah, and then after that I was on for a tiny brief amount of time. I was on the Tangled the series, or it's called Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure. Oh, yeah. And then I was on the Monsters at Work show, which is a Monsters Inc. spin-off series.
Can't wait for that.
Yeah, that's so coming out in July.
Hey.
And now I'm actually on an unannounced show. So.
Oh, can we bring up? I think it's interesting.
Oh yeah.
For the
well,
listeners.
actually, next week is technically my last week at Disney TV because I accepted an offer at Netflix for a feature. So
OMG! Wow!
Congrats.
Moving there. So it's bittersweet because I really loved working at Disney TV. So it's a little weird to be leaving after well over 5 years, 5.5 years, something like that. So, but I'm excited. It's a new chapter. So.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Who's going to be my Disney orientation twin now? Will you still remember me when you're gone?
Oh, I will.
Good. We're going to stay friends.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, for me, in terms of like resume or experience, so I came into Disney as a story apprentice, and I got to work on gigantic, rest in peace, Ralph Breaks the Internet, which was super fun. I was on that for like 2.5 years from the first screening to the last screening. And,
wow, that's great.
We got to make a short. I pitched to our short circuit program, and there's like a blind submission, and one of my ideas got picked, and got to make a short in like 2018, 2019.
Which is now on Disney Plus, right?
It is! Oh, yes. There's like this series called Short Circuit, and it collects all of these different shorts. I think mine's episode 2, and you just got to watch them all. They're so different and so fun. I love all of them. Yeah. And after that, I did a super secret project not announced yet. I'm so excited to talk about soon. And I got to board a tiny bit on Raya and the Last Dragon, which just came out. And I boarded on Encanto, which is the upcoming feature. And right now, I think it's okay to talk about, because it's been announced, I'm working on Iwaju, which is Disney and Kugali Media's project.
So
nice.
So
exciting.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, and I should mention Natalie and I know each other because I was story PA on Ralph Breaks the Internet. So I worked pretty closely with Natalie, and she
the
was
best
always
PA ever.
Oh, thank you. You were the best story artist ever. Yes. Because Natalie was so reliable and was so often our go-to person during crunch. And she was definitely one of those artists where you weren't nervous to knock on their door and ask them for special production favors. So thank you forever for being very flexible and easy to work with, and just, so kind and talented.
Oh my God, Katie. those were fun times. I'm really glad we got to be on the same project, and it was so cool watching you go from there to Disney Animator.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thanks guys so much for coming on to the podcast and talking about your backgrounds. I think it's super interesting. Well, part of the reason we had both of you on is because you guys have sort of a different backgrounds and experiences, like Natalie more focused on feature films, and Isabelle obviously focused more on TV. And we think kind of talking about story with both of those things in mind, like getting the opinions of both of you guys, is going to be really valuable for the listeners. So for everyone listening, in this episode, we're basically going to be having Isabelle and Natalie walk us through what a typical day at work entails for them. That's kind of what the MO is for our pipeline series. And then we're going to ask them a series of questions that were submitted by our lovely listeners. You guys came up with so many questions.
Thank you.
So, thank you. I mean, we're probably not going to even be able to get to all of them, but we will try our best because there is a lot of good stuff. Our whole goal with this episode is that hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a much better idea of what a storyboard artist is like and what that means, and kind of get excited about the possibilities of the job.
So let's start with the basics. Please explain to me, like I'm 5 years old, what is a storyboard artist?
So I feel like my answer to this question changes every time. So Natalie, feel free to kind of help me with this one. But for me, the way I like to describe it is that a storyboard artist is the person that kind of comes up with the sequences of the shots in the film or the TV show. And it's the stage that happens right after getting the script. And basically what we do is we draw quick little sketches that represent each shot and what happens within those shots. And I like to think of it as like we're creating the blueprint for the film or TV show or whatever story that we're storyboarding. And that way the rest of the production has kind of like a plan for how the film will play out. That's how I describe it.
That's lovely. I love that. I think you covered it. I would just say the way that I describe it to people, because I come from comics, is I say it's like a really rough black and white comic of the movie. you can read it picture by picture and you know what's going to happen in the movie, but it's not like timed yet. It's not colored. There's not sounds or voices or anything. And that it's a much cheaper way than animating a bunch of stuff and deciding later whether or not it works.
Yeah.
You figure out whether or not it works in
Changing
the
your mind.
storyboards. Yeah, and it's more redrawing than drawing, right? Like we go back, at least in feature, we go back and we redo the scenes so many times. It's about reworking the script and the jokes and the characters until you crack it and you can send it downstream.
Yeah, so each panel will be really quick and really rough. The point isn't to create a really pretty picture, just to kind of convey or tell the story clearly, so that it's efficient.
Yeah, and it's cool because like at the end of the process for you guys, it's all cut together, right? So it's like there's like an editorial cut of the entire movie or TV show just in storyboard form, and it's like exactly how you described. It's like a comic book. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, you can find a lot of animatics on YouTube. I often send people to look at those if they aren't entirely sure what storyboarding is. You can find like whatever TV show you like that's animated. If you search the title and animatic, you can probably find it on YouTube and see what the boards looked like.
Yeah. It's tough to describe to people because I feel like it's kind of an invisible part of the process because your work is kind of very indirectly in the final product. Your decisions are, but not so much the actual drawings that you create. So to the everyday person who doesn't work in animation, it can be a little confusing.
Yeah, we just draw the rough draft. Nothing that we draw is in the final picture, except like you said, the decisions. You can be like, that artist made it better, but I drew it first.
I promise I contributed.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I love that you said that it comes right after kind of the script stage. And I think it might be useful for people if they don't know to know that it comes right before what stage? Is it usually layout that happens right after? It's obviously edited together, but then does it go straight to layout?
Yeah, that's right. After the animatic is edited together, it goes to layout. And I hope I'm getting this right, but for 2D productions, I think the layout artist is typically also known as the background designer, and they will go off the boards and design the layouts for the episode. And then for 3D productions, the layout artist is very different. They're the ones that translate the storyboards into the 3D environment, so they're 3D artists instead. But yeah, that's right.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
And feature like CG TV, it would be editorial, and then layout is the next department it goes to.
Okay, interesting. Is there ever any... So I'm just going off script now because I'm interested and have my own questions here. But is there ever much back and forth between, like, especially with translating it into 3D, like you would in the feature world for a CG movie? Is there ever any back and forth where they're like, we literally can't do this in layout and CG, or how does that work?
I think layout artists would love to talk to us directly sometimes. We had a mixer at Disney where Story got to meet at layout, and it was so fun because they're really talented and we don't actually get to meet them that often, even though our departments are right next to each other. And that did come up a couple of, we were like kind of poking, like, okay, what's one thing you'd love to tell a story? And they were like, could you maybe practice perspective a little more often? This is not possible the way that you drew it. They have to do a lot of cheating sometimes to get, we need the character's face in this shot, but we also need this thing in the background, and it's an upshot. They're like, that's not possible, but I'll try.
That's so interesting. We'll have to bring that up in our layout episode.
Yeah, that's right.
This is like the hot goss of the episode.
That's so interesting to hear because I work in TV, all the layout and animation is outsourced, so they don't get a chance to yell at us story artists.
You're far away.
Because we make the animatic and then we ship it off, and then I guess I don't know what happens after that. It comes back and it's beautiful and they do a great job.
Yeah.
So I hope I did a good job. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure they save us.
That's so funny. Well, I think this transitions well to sort of our second question and second section, which is really the heart of the whole day in the life topic, which is really getting into what does your average day look like, and has that varied depending on the project or the position you held, and this is a good place to also talk about your process and what does your process look like from script launch to finished storyboard.
Yeah, so in TV, I guess I can kind of start by talking about the timeline of events that happens in TV, because it doesn't, at least in my experience, it's stayed pretty consistent and the same. But I mean, it's different from production to production, but the schedule itself doesn't change much within the production. But basically what happens is we start with a handout or a launch where we're basically we get kind of started on an episode where we have basically a meeting with the director about what episode sequences we're assigned to. We get the script, and often we'll have maybe a little bit of a table read where we read through the script together, and we have a chance to kind of ask any questions about the intent of the episode and the vision that the director has. We're also then at that point given any relevant character, prop, or location designs that have already been created, which is not always the case. But that's when they can kind of give us all of that reference for us to work from. And then after that, we start storyboarding. And at least in my experience, it's been anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks per episode. And halfway through, we have a rough pitch. And then at the end of it, we have kind of like a final pitch after we've addressed any kind of like major notes that happened during the rough pitch. And then after that, it gets handed off to editorial. And we get launched on a new episode. So
and that goes to storyboard revisionists sometimes in TV, right?
Yeah, so that's one of the I believe that's one of the differences between TV and feature is that in TV there's a position called storyboard revisionist, and they are the ones that kind of handle any extra additional story notes after it goes into editorial and after it comes back as an animatic. So the storyboard artist is responsible for kind of creating the first draft or maybe the second draft, because we have a rough pitch and then we have one chance to kind of like do the notes on it.
Wow.
But then once it gets to editorial and the editor puts in all the dialogue and the sound effects and creates the first rough animatic out of that, that's when we're done with that at that point, and the revisionist can come in and take over from there. So I mean, day to day, I'm really, for the most part, just at my computer drawing, redrawing, going through the script. But yeah, and then like the key meetings will be like the story launch or the script launch, the rough pitch, and then the final pitch. So yeah, that's largely how it is in TV.
Cool.
Awesome.
Nice.
It's really similar in feature. It's so interesting that like you call it issuing or launch, or sorry, you said handout or launch, and we call it issuing, but it's the same thing. Sometimes there's slightly different terminology depending on the studio, but it's roughly the same thing. So yeah, we generally work 45-hour weeks. So we're there Monday through Friday. We've got cubicles or offices and all this nice company software and hardware that we're drawing on. And I guess every production is different. This is not true of every production, but for example, you could be on a movie that's like, we issue on Mondays and we're going to read through the script. Here's a printout of the script. We'll do a dramatic reading where we assign parts to different people and we read it out loud. And the writer's in there, the director's in there, all the story artists in there, maybe the producer's in there, production supervisor, production assistant are in there. And after the reading, there's a moment to react to the pages. We actually have the privilege of saying, well, I didn't like that. I think that you should do it more like this or that, respectfully and depending on where the project is at. At the beginning, directors are often looking for input from story artists, like, is my idea clear yet? Do you like this character? Is this as funny as it could be? Whereas closer to the end, they're only looking for very surgical notes, like, this isn't going to blow up anything that we've already done, but I think that, like this line would be a little bit funnier, like a little dialogue tweak or whatever. So after we talk about it as a group, go back and forth, brainstorm ideas, and the director makes a decision about which way we're going, the story artist will go off with their assignment. And roughly like 3 to 7 pages at a time for a scene, and then probably try and pitch a rough version of that at the end of the week, get notes, have maybe another half week or a full week if it's a really cushy schedule to clean it up, time it, and send it down to editorial. So we don't do like real animatic timing, but we kind of roughly time it just to give the editor a starting point. And in feature, our schedules are based around these movies coming out about once a year. So a movie can be in storyboards for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And in that time, we storyboard the whole thing and screen it as like an animatic, the whole movie, about 8 to 10 times. So you're on like a 3-month screening schedule where the director and writer focus on the script and improve it from the last version. The story artists draw anything that changed since the last version. The editor gets it all up to speed for a screening, and then we screen it and talk about what worked and what didn't work.
Wow.
Cool.
That's super cool. And can you guys talk a little bit about like what pitching entails, and also are you still terrified about pitching, or is that over with for you guys?
Seems so scary.
Yeah.
To the outside observer.
Yes.
The answer is yes. I'm still terrified to this day. But I think that, I think it's very personal. It really depends on what kind of person you are. I'm personally pretty afraid of public speaking in general, or any kind of performance.
Welcome to the Animation Happy Hour. So sorry.
So this took some time for me to be convinced to be on the show.
Truth comes out.
Yeah. So like anything revolving around performance is kind of tough for me. So I would say for me personally, that was maybe the most challenging thing about the job for me. And I want to say I've gotten a little bit used to it, but I feel like I still get pretty nervous every single time. Like at least in the 5 minutes right before the pitch, I'll be like fine, and then suddenly I'll freak out. But yeah, what was the question again?
Just like for people who are like kind of unfamiliar with like what even a pitch is, could you paint a picture of your average day or average pitch day?
Definitely. So a pitch is basically when you get to present your work, present your storyboards to the director and anybody else relevant in the room. So that usually, at least in TV, is for the executive producers or the showrunners. I feel like they're just typically called the executive producers or EPs, and the directors. And usually in TV, there are multiple directors because they kind of take over like half the episodes, and the other director will take over the other half. Sometimes there's a supervising director that kind of overlooks all of it. And then any of the producers, or sometimes the writers, will be in the room as well. And then production management, like the production coordinators, to take notes and everything. So, and that's at least during the rough pitch in TV, that's the chance where people can kind of give broader notes. But there's usually not a ton of room in the schedule for super huge notes. It'll usually just be kind of like, it really depends. I've gotten some pretty big story changes, but for the most part, at least in my experience, the script stays largely the same from the time I work on it to the end, aside from like small moments or gags gags or maybe some lines too.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's generally what the pitch is in TV, at least.
In feature, Disney oral tradition loves to say storyboarding was invented by Disney. Back in the day, pinning rough drawings up on a corkboard and pitching with a yardstick. So we still have people working in the department today who pitched on paper, who prefer pitching on paper. There are still people who draw on paper, and then it's someone else's job to digitize those for downstream departments. But most people board digitally and pitch digitally. So you're sitting at a computer in a conference room at the end of the table, and you're clicking the right arrow to go forward in your boards. You're doing the voices, you're doing the sound effects, you're putting on a performance like you're telling a bedtime story to somebody. The lights are out, everybody's looking at the screen. And at the end, again, there's a moment everybody applauds because they're very polite. And then there's a moment to rip it to shreds. So because we have the luxury of a longer schedule and these multiple screenings for one movie, it can completely get scrapped. It can get rewritten. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely just like this open conversation afterwards of what worked, what didn't work. And we can go back and forth quite a bit in the room after that. And to answer your question, Ben, do we still get terrified? I was at the beginning, and I wasn't sure I would be able to make it as a story artist because I wouldn't say I'm like a particularly loud or gregarious person. And there's kind of this image, at least there was in my head of, oh, you gotta be like a bro. You gotta be like really confident and a type A, and you gotta be wacky. And I'm not. But I've been really happy to see so many different kinds of people as story artists and successful story artists. There are very, very shy, quiet story artists, people who don't do the sound effects. They just kind of in a monotonous tone pitch through their boards. And it's fun to watch when somebody hams it up, but you don't have to do that. So if anybody's listening and they're like, I just don't know if I have the right personality for story, like, it's a broad job. You can be a lot of different kinds of people and succeed in story.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like I had a very similar, preconception about what a story artist was. So I originally thought I wouldn't do story. Yeah, when I first started studying animation, I didn't know what I wanted to do within animation. And I think because of the pitch, I always kind of automatically assumed I would never be a story artist. And I think, and I'm not the kind of person to do a ton of sound effects or even different voices or accents. I just don't like that. So the way I pitch is more like a dramatic reading of the boards rather than different voices, because I'm a little too shy for that personally. But you're right, I have seen different types. Yeah, that's true.
But I actually kind of like pitching now. I don't when I'm not confident
that's great.
In my boards. Like if I rushed, if I'm late, I don't like pitching then because I'm like, oh, this is shit. I'm sorry. But normally I actually really like it now. It's like, it's fun to see a reaction to your work. And it gets less scary every time I do it, for sure.
That's
awesome
great.
to hear.
I'm so glad for you. I wish it happened to me.
Yeah.
It feels similar to how we feel about dailies.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always scary, especially 5 minutes before. And then,
right.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's really fun if you get a reaction. And,
Yeah.
I love animation dailies. I mean, you guys are just like, it's Christmas, here's your present. Animation dailies is so cool.
That is the kindest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, that is. Gosh, that is so much great stuff. I'm interested, what sorts of software do you usually use on a daily basis?
Or especially even like as an aspiring student, like what would you work in? And,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So in TV, I've only worked with Storyboard Pro. So as a professional storyboard artist, I've only worked with Storyboard Pro. I did not use Storyboard Pro, however, up until the very first day on the job. I had Photoshop the whole time, and in school I was using Photoshop. And I think I like had bought my student version of Photoshop CS something at the time, and so I had that physical copy, and I'd been using that for years, and I built my portfolio off of that. And then I did hear from after I got my first job offer at Bixpix, they told me I would be using Storyboard Pro, so I very frantically downloaded a bunch of tutorials and the free Storyboard Pro trial and learned it the night before my job.
Amazing.
Dang.
In Feature, it's nice. They let you use basically whatever drawing software you want to. I use Photoshop. A lot of people do. But increasingly, people coming from other studios are coming in and they're like, I prefer working with Storyboard Pro. So we work with that too. The pitching software you have to learn to use is proprietary to Disney. So you like learn that when you show up, and it's a nice cataloging and pitching software. But drawing, you can draw with whatever you want. Some people draw on iPad. There's some people can board in Procreate, and there's also a Disney proprietary thumbnailing software for iPad. And when I was trying to break in, it was just Photoshop. I would download like a template for the thumbnail panels, and then just kind of draw in a new layer. And I didn't super know what I was doing, but that worked well enough.
I'm so curious, does anyone board traditionally still, or is that just does not work with the current way things go?
Yeah, especially if you're in the story room and you're trying to pitch an idea visually. There's paper on the tables, there's Sharpies, there's grease pencils to like shade gray, and people will like sketch something really quick and hold it up. What about this? What if they did this?
Nice.
I think John Ripa, Mark Smith, Don Doherty, they still board on paper sometimes, and then it'll be transferred to digital later.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. I remember on Ralph Breaks the Internet, Jim Reardon would sometimes board like a whole sequence on the story pad physically. And I distinctly remember one time he just went into his office for like 2 hours and boarded the entire hair. What was that sequence called? The one where hair shoot. Yeah. The whole sequence where the princesses like rescued Ralph while he was falling from the air. I remember he boarded that in 2 hours first in like epic. Very, very roughly, very quickly. Oh my gosh. And I scanned it in. And then I remember, Natalie, I think you helped clean it up, and some others. And so some people definitely still board.
That's a great point.
Yeah, but then we usually do scan it digitally, so you can pitch it digitally. But
the nice thing about paper is you go so much faster. Like with digital, it's so easy to start animating or adding tone and like draw way too many drawings. But on paper, it's like just the ideas, like get it out fast.
That makes sense.
Wow. That's really interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, do you guys go through distinct crunch periods? Like, does production ebb and flow depending on where you are in the production? And do you ever have downtime, or is it stay fairly consistently busy? And how does it change over time?
So I guess I would say that in my experience, it's been fairly consistent in TV. Mostly because we're on a pretty rigid episode rotation, and it's kind of just up to us to get everything done within those 6 or so weeks. And then we're off that episode and launched on a new one pretty much no matter what. And then after that, it's up to the revisionist to kind of like take care of the rest of it. So generally, the workload is pretty much the same within any episode rotation, depending on how challenging that particular script is. And then, I mean, like, of course, things can kind of get naturally hectic right before a pitch, because you think you're good at time management until it's 2 days before the pitch and suddenly you're panicking about the state of your work. And then, right after the pitch, I generally feel pretty relaxed, but not for that long, to be honest, because right after the pitch, they schedule you for another script launch pretty much right away. And so as a result, I feel like in TV, we just don't get a ton of like scheduled downtime necessarily.
Yeah, y'all work really hard and fast. TV sounds like it's no joke.
Yeah, I the thing is, like, it's so fast, but the pace is so consistently fast. It's not like all of a sudden we're just going to get dropped like a ton of work at one point. Like, it's just, here's a ton of work, figure out how to get it done in this period of time, but it's not really going to change much unless there's some sort of emergency where something isn't working. But at least in my experience, that hasn't really changed much.
So this is one area where feature might be pretty different because we do ebb and flow quite a bit around those screening schedules. So about once every 3 months, there's a really tight crunch. And, you know, production always does their best to try and keep the workload steady throughout and front load anything that we can be working on, even when the writer's working on the script and there are no pages to board. Okay, you guys do some exploratory assignments. Here's a section that we know needs more jokes, so just go off and pitch us joke ideas for this section for a couple weeks. But it inevitably, around the screening, when there's a drop-dead deadline from edit to get the boards down there, it's like all hands on deck. Please come in on the weekends if you can. Yeah. And paid, overtime paid, which I love money, so I'm happy to do it. About every 3 months, there's a pretty crunchy area. I don't want to be too negative describing like just the crunch without mentioning that there is also a nice lull around the screening. Right after we have that crazy crunch and we turn everything over to edit, it's out of our hands and suddenly it's edit's crunch. And we get to relax normally for about a week before the screening. And even after that, there's kind of a quiet period where we're more talking about the big picture for a few days, right? So it's a lot of meetings, but not a lot of drawing. And often you can go home early. So that's kind of our recovery period.
Awesome. So can you guys talk a little bit about the relationship between the story artist, the director, the story team, and just kind of how the team is run?
Yeah. So in TV, they're usually, I can kind of describe like the makeup of the story team in TV, but on most productions, there are, I want to say, about 8 storyboard artists, at least in my experience. And for most shows that are 22 minutes long, we're typically partnered with another storyboard artist on an episode, which that might be an additional difference between TV and feature that we get in that we get storyboard partners. And it just basically means that we each get assigned half the script upon launch, and we're kind of there for the launch together. We pitch together, and what's great about having a storyboard partner is that you can kind of, it's just an automatic person that you can easily bounce ideas off of. I mean, you can bounce ideas off of anyone, but they know the episode you're on. They've been launched on the exact same episode and story. So you can kind of like, it's somebody else who has another, like a pretty good knowledge of the story that you're working with.
Yeah.
The whole time we pretty much mostly communicate with a director. And then during the pitches, that's when we communicate with a larger part of the crew. Sometimes I've been on some shows where you pitch to the entire crew. But for the most part, it's been usually just the executive producers, the writer, anybody in production management that's assigned to the episode as well, and your story partner. So we pitch it kind of together, each of our sections. So yeah, that's generally how it goes.
Awesome.
Nice. In feature, there's about 8 to 10 artists on a project at a time, less at the beginning, more during like the crunchiest crunch. And hopefully like we get to know each other pretty well because we're in the room at the same time and bouncing ideas off of each other and helping each other. The director is normally the person running the show. So like movie ideas at Disney come from the director, and ultimately they're the decision maker when we're not really agreeing on what's the right path forward. And the writer may be in the room as well. And sometimes we have writers / directors. So, that can happen too. But ultimately, like the story team is there to support the director's vision. So a big learning curve is like, it's so natural for everybody to have like their own version of what the movie should be and what they imagine it should be, right? Like, oh, my head canon for what this is going to be. I love it. And eventually, like, there comes a point in the project where you realize, oh, the director's vision is not what's in my head, and I need to help them make the best possible version of the movie that's in their head. So it is about, like hopefully getting to know your director as well as possible and like their taste and sense of humor, and just like, of course, like bringing your full self and everything that you have to offer, but like realizing that you're basically a menu for the director to choose from. You're just like, what about this? What about that? What do you like? That one? Okay, we'll do that one. So yeah, who was the question? The story artist, the director, the story team. Yeah, that's kind of how it's run. And then production is there to make sure that we don't run out of time or money. And they're wonderful. I need them so much.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm so glad you ended with that. That is a great segue into the next question. This is something we get a lot of questions about. Basically, we hear a lot of like, how many panels should you do in a day or per sequence, etc. Can you two possibly give a rough estimate or a range for the kinds of deadlines and turnaround times a story artist is expected to abide by?
Yeah, so it can greatly vary depending on the production. But in my experience, for the most part, I've gotten about 6 to 8 weeks per episode. But basically, keeping in mind that halfway through those 6 weeks, we do have to do a rough pitch. So in that time, in the 2 to 3 week period before then, we are expected to rough out the entire half the 22 minute script, basically. So, and it's important to just kind of keep it really rough in that first, for the rough pitch, essentially. So that it gives a little bit more room for those broader changes if necessary. But yeah, I mean, that remains fairly consistent. Like every 6 weeks, I'll be launched on a new episode, regardless of where it's at.
Nice. It can vary a lot in feature because your assignment might be 2 pages and they want to see it, it's Monday now, they want to see it Wednesday, and that's reasonable. Or you could have a giant fight scene or like a really long scene sometimes. So I think maybe the more useful thing to say is when I see portfolios from artists, often there are too many drawings versus not enough. So we have a story test, or we used to, where the challenge was to tell a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end in 120 frames. And I feel like that's more challenging than showing me that you can do a 600 panel sample, because there isn't time for that normally in production. You do want to be really efficient where you can. So learning when you actually need more drawings and when you can communicate something with 1 or 2 is really important. Just for like, it is important to learn how to draw quickly. So just to give kind of a benchmark, if you're boarding like a 5-page scene in a week, which is, the ideal general rule that hardly ever happens, but let's say it's that. I mean, like maybe 200 panels a week. I think that would be fine. If you're thumbnailing, hopefully you can get through them in like 2 days and then pitch something rough by Friday.
Wow.
Yeah, nice. I feel like I've heard that at least in TV, the general, I don't know about panel count. I think that's really difficult to calculate, but sure. I have heard the general rule in TV, 1 to 2 pages of script per day to rough that out. Makes sense. Obviously, not all script pages are created equal. Some of them will be filled with action, and it'll all just be in like 2 lines. The battle ensues, and that's rough. But sometimes it'll just be ensues. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
I've seen that before. It's fun, but and sometimes it'll just be kind of a simple dialogue scene. So but 1 page, maybe 2 pages a day sounds about right. But it's so hard to kind of like give a precise number about that.
Yeah.
That's totally understandable and so funny. It's the exact same in animation where, somebody's like, how many seconds should you animate a week or whatever? It's like, well, what's happening during those seconds? It can take me 3 weeks to animate 2 seconds, or if it's a different kind of shot, I can animate 10 seconds in a week,
That's
that's
the
really,
same thing.
Yeah, lots of parallels.
Yeah.
On a related note, how rough or clean do drawings need to be, and does that ever vary by the studio, by the production, by who's in charge? In your experience.
Yeah, it does vary from production to production, which is, I feel like, something I'm going to keep saying.
Yeah.
I have had very different experiences, and it really largely depends on the director and what they're looking for and what the production's looking for. So for TV, because the animation is outsourced, in general, we do have to end up with like a fairly clean and clear looking final storyboard, like the final assignment that we hand in, I guess, does need to be fairly clean. It needs to be generally cleaner on 2D shows, just because there isn't that CG layout phase that can act as a nice little buffer where they save the storyboards and make it all work.
Right.
And because what happens in, at least from what I understand, in 2D productions, the animators at the studio that it's all outsourced to, they do kind of end up relying on a lot of the storyboard panels for key poses in their animation. So it is a little bit more important to kind of get that right. So yeah, at least that's what I've heard. Natalie, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like it's more important to be a little bit more clean in TV, whereas I've heard in feature, it's okay to be pretty rough.
I'd say that's fair. Yeah, because especially at Disney Feature, we're not outsourcing. We get to go down to animation and talk to each other. If there's any kind of miscommunication, it's very rare.
Right.
So we can be pretty rough in our boards. And especially when it gets crunchy, I've pitched things that are so ugly you wouldn't believe. You would not believe what gets through. Stick figures, lollipop people. But if
That's awesome.
it reads and you know what the emotion is and you know what's happening, sometimes that's fine. So it really depends. And then there are productions where maybe the person who's head of story or director, they're a really strong drafts person. Maybe they come from story and they expect a certain level of draftsmanship in the art. So like that can happen too. But luckily with us, there's normally a few movies boarding at a time and they can have really different vibes. So like for me, Ralph Breaks the Internet was a great fit for me because I love comedy and I'm not the strongest drafts person in our department, but like that production was run by Rich Moore and Jim Reardon and Josie Trinidad was head of story. And the three of them are really great at reading. They all three are board artists and they're like, as long as it reads, like we can tell what's happening even when it's really rough. So let's just get the ideas out and focus on the entertainment. So that was like a really great production for me to ramp up at Disney on.
It is so interesting to hear you guys talk through this because I'm thinking like a lot of students who might feel like their draftsmanship isn't completely there yet. You know, maybe they have really, really strong ideas or really funny story ideas. I guess, what would you say to those prospective storyboard artists who maybe like do not have necessarily a good sense of draftsmanship yet, but they have really strong ideas? Do you feel like those people, it's fine to be able to break into story, like don't worry about it? Or do you think there's some minimum, like, no, you kind of have to have like perspective, you know, you have to have some sense of anatomy, like, you know, how do they manage that? I'm curious because I feel like that there's probably a lot of people like that thinking along those lines.
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of thoughts for that, so I'm trying to get that organized.
Sorry,
I feel like it's a great question. It's a really good place to be. I feel like if you have all the ideas and that's kind of like where your strengths lie, and the technical aspect of drawing, I feel like can be worked on. It's not that it's easy to get better at drawing, but it's simple to get better at drawing. It's practice, and whereas the ideas, that's the kind of part where it's a little more nebulous. It's a little more difficult to kind of like train yourself to have more ideas or be more creative. So I feel like that's a really great place to start. With storyboarding, what I generally tell people to focus on the most is what Natalie said before, like clarity of storytelling, and maybe pushing your emotions and having kind of like strong poses and emotional drawings and expressions, because I would say the most common thing that I see in kind of early story portfolios from students is that either the storytelling or the drawings are a little unclear, or they're very stiff. And those are kind of the first two things that I kind of like latch onto and say, like, work on that. And as long as you can tell a story clearly with an energetic drawing and clear drawing, I think you're in a really great place to kind of get to where you want to be as a storyboard artist.
100% agree. I love your answer, Isabelle.
Great.
This is such a great question. I feel like it's super juicy. We could stay here for like 10 minutes. Can you rephrase the question again, just so I make sure I stay on topic?
Oh, man. Yeah, no, this is another good thing to do. I have to figure out how to rephrase it. What did I say? No, I would say, what advice do you have for a student now who's interested in storyboarding, but their draftsmanship, it just isn't there, and they have really, really good ideas, and maybe they draw like stick figures or something? I guess that's one part of the question. The second part is like, is there a line where you kind of need to, like, you need perspective, you need anatomy. You have to have some minimum of drawing to get into the job.
Yeah, man, this is a great question. Okay, so Isabelle nailed it. It's so much easier to teach somebody how to draw in perspective better, or to up their draftsmanship over time through practice, than it is to look at someone's portfolio and be like, oh, they don't understand how to tell a story, or they're not funny, like that's really hard to teach somebody.
Oh man.
or like they're not nice, they're not collaborative. Those skills, you can teach somebody how to use software, or how to not break the 180-degree rule, or how to, draw like eyes in this person's art style. That's fine. But yes, story is intense because you could be asked to draw anything today at work. It might be like they hop on a horse and ride through a library, or, they have a laser battle, or like we're in outer space. It's like being a comic book artist. You have to be like, not just have memorized how to draw one type of person doing like one genre of thing. You have to be prepared to like roughly sketch out something you've never drawn before. So you have to be really flexible and willing to like break it down, like come up with the composition of what this new thing is that you've never drawn before, and draw it from a bunch of different angles, like hundreds of times, which is complicated.
And fast.
Fast, exactly. Yeah. So like if somebody's, it does have to be at a certain level to break in anywhere. And then certain studios, the standards are going to be really high depending on like what the directors want to see, or like how hard it is to get in there. They might, even if it's not strictly necessary, that might be the difference between two portfolios where it's like, well, we like both of them, but look how pretty the art is on this one. That can sometimes get you in, even though it's not strictly necessary for a story portfolio. These drawings all get thrown away, but I mean, we're all seduced by beautiful art. So it's not a bad thing to focus on. Let's put it that way. Like, it's not a bad skill to have. I say if you're not sure if you're there yet, a really awesome test you can do is storyboard a scene, take all the dialogue out and the descriptions out, and then hand it to a friend who's never seen it before and ask them to read it back to you, to tell you what they think is happening when they look at your boards. And if they're not getting it right, then it's not clear enough.
Yeah.
That is such a good tip.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I feel like that is something that I will recommend somebody to do as their next storyboard exercise if I find that their portfolio is filled with a lot of writing, because in the end, that's not the job. The job is to be able to tell a story visually. So I'm like, all right, try to, for your next, personal story sequence, try to come up with something where you don't have the crutch of dialogue to tell you what's happening.
That's so smart.
That's a really important skill as a story artist.
Thank you, guys. This is a juicy topic. All right, so now we're moving on to the next topic, which is who and what types of people might enjoy storyboarding. Sorry, I said enjoy.
Enjoy it.
Enjoy. Who would enjoy it?
Storyboarding.
Oh my God. Let's keep all of this in.
Okay. Well, if you are somebody who loves not just drawing, but you like story as well. Like you get out of a movie and you turn to your friend and you're like, could you believe that scene where they realized what was going on? And oh my gosh, or you read screenwriting books, or, you have opinions about how a movie could have been better when it comes to the story. This is a great job for you because you get to draw, but you also get to focus on writing and filmmaking and story, like how to make the characters better and the plot better. It's great if you're somebody like me who doesn't necessarily have the patience to learn how to photorealistically draw things or paint. We don't have to worry about color. We don't have to worry about it's not the final drawing. You can have a really great storyboarding career with lower draftsmanship than some other jobs. I mean, they're amazing story artists, but just saying, if you like getting the idea out and sketching it and moving on, this is a great job for you. And you don't mind drawing fast. And you're social. It's social. You have to get along with other people and collaborate. I guess that's really important. People will say, thank you for working on that for a month. It's out of the movie now, and here's your next scene, and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah, that's almost exactly what I was going to say in terms of if you're the kind of artist that doesn't like to spend more than a few minutes on any kind of drawing and doesn't really have the patience to, render every detail and I mean, I personally really, I get impatient very fast when I draw. And so I think that was really what appealed to me about storyboarding, was that it's really more about kind of getting the ideas out quickly and then being comfortable with throwing those ideas away and coming up with new ideas, and that's okay because that's part of the process, and it's part of the process to get the most out of the story and or to more figure out how to more effectively convey a certain emotion, or to how to direct an audience's emotion. So I found that particularly exciting about storyboarding. Also, I feel like anybody who kind of likes to look at the bigger picture of things, it really helps, because even just talking to Garrett about the differences between our jobs, they overlap in so many ways, except that he does it on much more of a micro level, whereas I do the exact same thing, but on a macro level when it comes to the project. So the animator's job in some way is to kind of elicit a reaction out of the audience, and it's the same for story, but just on a bigger picture scale. So, and I love that. I really like that about.
That's why they're so. I feel like they are kind of related in a lot of ways, like how you described. But yeah, it's super interesting.
Do you guys find that story artists have different strengths, like whether it's action, comedy, or musical choreography? And do you two personally have something that you gravitate towards or especially enjoy?
I think a lot of people do have particular strengths when it comes to tone or genre. And like the classic division would be, do you do comedy, drama, or action, right? Because most animated films in the US are like somewhere in that neighborhood. Like there's not a lot of horror. There's not like a lot of strictly romance stuff, but comedy, action, drama, those are like, that's the power tripod. If you can do those three, you're set. You're set. And there are definitely people who like skew towards one or the other. I'd say like I like comedy and drama. I'd love to learn how to get better at action, but I haven't boarded a lot of action scenes yet. And they tend to go to people that the directors already know are good at action. So if you want to branch out, sometimes you have to do that on your own time or like, challenge yourself.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because I agree that most people have kind of like a tendency to either enjoy or be good at either comedy, drama, or action. But I think in TV, it just doesn't matter because you're just given half the episode and it doesn't matter what's like.
That's awesome.
I've been on productions where they'll ask like, oh, is there a particular scene or section that you'd like to do that calls to you in the script, and that's really great because that's kind of a chance to kind of talk with your storyboard partner and figure out who wants to tackle what. But for the most part, we just kind of have to do it anyway, regardless. We're not necessarily like cast, so to speak, on specific types of sequences or anything, because every episode just needs to get done. You're put on a rotation. And there
good
you
luck.
Yeah, good luck.
You know that meme of the Shiba Inu that's like jacked and then the one that's crying in the corner? I feel like that's TV and feature. Like, I just have to get the episode done. Oh, they gave me an action scene. I can't do that.
But I don't know. I feel like
That's
it's
amazing.
really interesting to hear how it works in feature for you, because I do kind of like wish sometimes that I got the chance to like try it again, like try to tackle the same thing, but with a different angle and see if I can elicit a better reaction out of that. And I feel like I don't get a ton of chances to do that. And that challenges a different part of your brain to have to come up with a more efficient or a better way to do it. Because there's no one way to storyboard anything. And that's partially what's so exciting about storyboarding too.
That's
There's
a
no
great point. We do have time to iterate. So much time, so many iterations. But like, there's time for mentorship. Like your head of story can come in and explain why they wanted a different way, and you can see it 5 different ways and why it works better that way. So that is a nice thing about feature.
I feel like it just challenges a different part of your brain because it is tough to kind of tackle the exact same thing that you just spent so many hours doing, but in a different way, just to see if that works better.
Yeah.
Based off of feedback. And so I don't know. I think that can be really challenging too, because that is something that I hear out of people in feature where it's like, okay, well, if you're willing to like redo the same thing for weeks at a time, then feature is the right way to go. So, but I find that really exciting. So I like that.
Nice. I love your state of mind. That's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
And maybe also that kind of reveals to me that feature and TV might attract 2 different type of storyboard artists. Maybe storyboard artists who are more interested in kind of more variety and just doing all sorts of different things, or I don't know. I don't want to say that you're not going to get pigeonholed in feature necessarily, but maybe it's a little harder.
It's something that comes up. Yeah. So like our studio is really aware of that, and they try not to do that. Your head of story might come to you and ask, are you trying to stretch in any area? What can I cast you on that you'd be excited about? But it just happens naturally. Yeah. For a lot of the time. Another cool thing about TV from the outside looking in is like, wow, what you drew gets made. like 2 months later. It's animated. It's like, wow, you boarded that and now it's a thing, like within the same year. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fast. There's only one show that I've been on where like it's still not out yet, and I'm so excited for it to come out, and that's the Monsters show.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
Monsters at Work. Yeah, and you know, it's funny because now that I think about it, it's probably because they adopted more of a feature approach to that show, or at least that's what I've been told. So maybe that's why they've taken their time. But I'm excited to see it. But you're right, yeah. Awesome.
So we actually have an exciting first listener question for you guys from at RJ_Rod. RJ Rod, here we go. Do story artists come from random backgrounds? And I'm going to assume, I guess that I'm trying to think of, maybe he's talking about like, you know, different jobs, like, you know, they kind of like Natalie was talking about, she came from comic books, or I don't know, maybe you have, I don't know. Yeah. Answer it as you please, I guess.
I think it's safe to say yes. There are, you know, some classic schools that like a lot of people graduate from Cal Arts or Sheridan or USC or Art Center or SCAD. And then they come to story. And those are like really great backgrounds if you can afford that. But a lot of people didn't go to art school. There's not a required degree to be a story artist, which is cool. So as long as you have like the skills and the portfolio, the pedigree doesn't matter so much. I know people who were pre-med students. I know people who had previous careers before transitioning into story. A lot of people who were 2D animators, and when those jobs started to dry up, they transitioned into story because they could draw so well.
Oh, yeah.
You see people from all kinds of different backgrounds. So that's a cool thing about story.
That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've encountered a similar variety of people from different backgrounds who either went to art school, film school, or didn't go to art or film school at all, and just kind of worked on their skills on their own. I feel like I even remember, and I hope I'm not going to butcher this guy's backstory, but I do remember working with someone where I'm pretty sure he said he was a construction worker until the age of 27 or so, and but then he got into a motorcycle accident and then was kind of like bedridden for half a year and decided to kind of pick up drawing. He always liked to draw, like he always did little comics and stuff just for fun on the side, but never really thought about taking it seriously as a career or anything. But in those 6 months that he was in bed recovering, he learned about storyboarding, and I think he just kind of like became a storyboard artist after that because of his injury. So I thought that was really cool. And I hope I'm not getting the details right, but that was kind of largely what I remember from this guy's backstory. So I thought that was really cool.
That's
so
awesome.
you can start at any point, and and it's really just about the work that you put into it.
Super encouraging.
Yeah.
So the next question is, do you have any tips for breaking into story? So there are kind of quite a few sub-questions to this, so I'm just going to go list them all in one. One, can you describe what a portfolio might look like for a story artist? Does it vary depending on the medium, genre, etc.? Can you include comics or sequential art, gesture drawings? Does it need to be in animatic form on a website or a blog, etc.?
Okay, so I can speak to feature, what I've seen work well for folks. So the number one thing is you have to have storyboards. We can't evaluate your portfolio if all you have is comics and illustrations or character designs or animation. You need storyboards. Make sure those are the first thing we see when we open your portfolio and you've got more than one sample. I say 3 is a really good number. It's okay if you only have 2, but aim for 3. And they don't have to be long. They can be 100 panels each. That's okay. Just try and make sure that they have an arc. If it's a scene, it doesn't have to be a complete story, but a beginning, middle, and end. Setup, payoff. I want to see all three. Yeah, you can definitely put in supplementary material behind that. When I applied for the apprenticeship, I had a couple storyboard samples, and then I had comic pages because I came from comics. I felt like, okay, this isn't exactly the job, but it's a lot of the same skills. Maybe this will help them make a decision. I think it did. So if there's something else that you're proud of that you think is relevant, you can definitely put it in. I think figure drawing is even more relevant than comics. I would throw in some figure drawings, not the really nice shaded kneecap and knuckle stuff, but like gestural stuff, like 1 to 5 minute poses. And this is even better, sketches of things that you saw in the real world, like cafe sketches. I saw this really cute moment on the bus where this dad picked up his kid and they were like running in the air, like sketch that out. It doesn't have to be in a certain format, but that shows me like how you see the world. So that gets back to like not just your technical art skills, but who are you? How do you think about the same thing that we might see when we're walking down the street? Does your brain go to character moments, comedy, entertainment? Show us that. So one thing that would be awesome to put in a story portfolio if your goal is to work on CG projects or in feature is just showing that you know how to move the camera in 3D space. That's a big difference between a 2D TV show and a CG feature. So it's a little bit gimmicky, but I do recommend for people, if you know you're going for CG feature, to find somewhere in your board samples to put a 3D camera move. Maybe, the extreme example is like a tracking shot following, a dish that's going through a restaurant up to a table. Or like somebody who's going through a train and they're like looking in the seats at people and it's not just a straight zoom. Maybe you zoom and swivel over and then you keep zooming, a 3D camera move like that. So just finding a place to put that in so we know your brain works that way and you're aware of the challenges of boarding for CG features. And sorry, I feel I'm reading your question. I just want to make sure I hit it all. I don't like when it's in animatic form, personally. I would rather just have there's this site called Speakerdeck where you can upload a PDF of your boards 1 frame per page, and that lets me click right to see 1 frame at a time, which is a lot better for evaluating your timing and your boards. Speakerdeck is free. I use that for uploading PDFs and making a nice clickable file. And you can embed that, for example, in like a Blogger website.
That's awesome.
So that's a free way to make a story portfolio. A lot of people do that. Free Blogger website. You just have 1 post at the top that's your portfolio post. And you got your name off to the side, your contact info off to the side. And then you can embed JPEGs of your art. Or, do a Speakerdeck. That's like the cleanest way, I think. Yeah, and we've hired people off of an Instagram account too, so don't feel like you have to splurge on a really expensive website. Just find what works best for you to show off your work and make sure that we can contact you.
That's really great. Maybe we can have links to especially Speakerdeck and some of those things in our show notes. So check those out.
For sure.
But, sorry, Isabelle, I just jumped in there. But
no, it's okay. I totally agree with Speakerdeck. I love Speakerdeck.
Yeah.
And I also, just to kind of jump off of your last point, I feel like for the longest time, my portfolio was just on a free Blogspot account. And because it was clean and simple, it was just an easy way to kind of, you can put in your Speakerdeck, what is it called? Embed link thing in there, so it'll show up and you can tap through your boards that way, and then you can upload JPEGs as well for your supplemental materials. But I feel like Natalie really nailed it. I completely would have said the exact same thing about what a typical storyboard portfolio would look like for TV as well. I actually don't think there might be a huge distinction between making a storyboard portfolio for TV versus feature, because I think they're looking for a lot of very similar skills. They're just going to be kind of applied in different ways between the two disciplines. But I mean, in the end, it's really mostly about being able to tell a story clearly. Yes, it does need to be, I want to say, like 90% storyboards, because that's the job that you're going to be hired for.
Yes.
So that just needs to be front and center. And yeah, I generally recommend 2 to 3 short story sequences. And I think I'm almost a broken record when it comes to explaining like short story, beginning, middle, and end. Like even if it's like you're writing this grand feature story and you just want to do one scene within that, just make sure that it has some sort of arc and a beginning, middle, and end, that so that the, you know, whoever's looking through it, a recruiter or a director, isn't really ever left with any kind of confused feelings about the work. Like, they understand what's going on, because I mean, that I think is one of the most important skills, is to be able to tell a story clearly. So if you have somebody looking through your storyboard portfolio and they're confused at any point, that's already not achieving what it needs to achieve. So but yeah, otherwise I totally agree. I think that's about the same for TV as well.
Can I add something I forgot? And Isabelle, tell me if it's the same for TV. I've been recommending people do, you know, at least 2, preferably 3 story samples, but also right after them to show the thumbnails for that same scene. So you've got like your boards, but underneath you've got your thumbnail sketches, because that kind of shows, it's like showing your math, right? It shows me the thought process.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
If we're so crunched that you're turning in stick figures, which can happen in feature, like, can we still read them?
Yeah, I feel like I say that when it comes to like supplemental stuff. Like, I think that's anything that kind of shows your thought process when you're, you know, building your story, I think is really helpful, especially if it's either thumbnails or maybe even some beat boards or character sketches. I think those are all kind of like really valid supplemental materials that I think most people like to see, because it still does the job of showcasing your ability to tell a story or a moment or tell something about a character.
I'm going to jump in with an off-script question for you to this, which is, can you guys talk about like the balance between your professional and personal work on a portfolio, if you're at that point in your career where you have some professional work? Like, what is a good ratio to have? Because I imagine it's beneficial to show that you've worked professionally, but then so much of it is your personal voice. So if you guys have an opinion on that, I'm sure listeners would like to know.
Oh, Katie, that's so good that you brought that up. I was going to completely forget to talk about that. And that's really important for feature, because sometimes we're given brainstorming assignments or borderline writing assignments. We really want to see original samples, something that you wrote. So that's very important. It can be like, oh, it's Little Red Riding Hood, but this is my twist on it. That's okay. But, you know, preferably it's an original story that you came up with. So that's actually way more relevant for us than a sample that you did for school, or like an assignment or fan art. Oh, we see a lot of portfolios that are like, these are the Frozen characters if I was boarding them. And it's like, no, we already know who they are.
Right.
What's in your head, you know? So yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up.
Here's what I would have done with Elsa if I was at Disney.
That's actually really interesting. I'm not quite sure if it's as important for TV, because I feel like I have seen people get jobs with showing previous production work on a TV show. I will say for myself, I do kind of tend to just put it on a totally different part of I have like a website, and my main portfolio is really just my personal work, because I feel like personally that best showcases what I can do and maybe my personality. Whereas I feel that my production work, it's cool to show, but I tend to kind of stay away from it because A, by the time it comes out, it's already like a year old and I don't really like it anymore. And then B, because it just goes through, I feel like I personally don't feel like it doesn't showcase my best work. Oh gosh, that sounds so terrible, but it's just because we're on such a like fast schedule that I feel like I would have wanted to take it even further and do more with it, but I just kind of had to walk away because I'm like, well, it's out of my hands now.
Yeah.
This is it. So
Sure.
I guess, I don't know. I guess for me, it's hard to kind of put that into my portfolio other than like, look, I've worked on a production before and this is kind of what the boards look like when I, work under those, deadlines and this is how I adapt my style for various productions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, is it common to have to do tests for story positions?
Yes. I tested to get my position. We try not to overuse that because they're unpaid and they take time to do. That's definitely a hot button issue in animation. I feel like we don't test people if they have feature experience and we can see boards from their past features. It's not necessary, but the good thing about boards is it means somebody whose portfolio doesn't necessarily show that they're ready, like they're right on the bubble, they can do a test and show us, oh, they're ready. And that means that we're not just hiring people who've already worked in feature or like the same pool of people. It lets us open it up for new opportunities.
That's
yeah.
cool.
In TV, it's very common to have a test. I think definitely for Disney TV, I had to take a test in order to get the job. But on the other hand, the very first storyboarding job I worked, they kind of just met me and they liked my portfolio. They had me kind of pitch through the portfolio. And so I got really lucky in that sense because I was able to kind of be somebody who did not have any storyboarding experience, and they really trusted me to kind of like get that done without having to take an unpaid test, which was really great.
Nice.
And then I think I would say right now, at least at Disney TV, I've been there long enough that I've at least like a lot of productions kind of already know my name and they've seen my samples at least within the studio. So I haven't really had to do it after a couple productions at this point. So
Nice.
So yeah.
Gotcha.
That's cool.
And what does that, I'm interested, what does that test generally look like for TV or for feature film?
Oh my God. Like the most nerve-wracking test I ever had to take was one of the first ones I didn't get the job, was for regular show. And I think it's okay to talk about this because it's off, they're not giving out this test anymore. But it was like trying to see if you had the same sense of humor as the show creator. So they were like, here's this character, he's making up a rap about homework, write the lyrics for them. Here's this character who's,
oh my goodness.
I know. Here's this character who's like trimming a hedge, turn it into a funny shape. Like what has he trimmed it into? And I felt so incompetent when I turned that test in. I was like, is this funny? Am I funny? Do I know what I'm doing? And when they never wrote back, I was like, I am not funny. So a lot of the time tests are just seeing, like you can tell from somebody's portfolio normally if their skills are at that level or not. People should only give you a story test if they're trying to figure out, are you a good fit for this sense of humor for this project? So it might be kind of specific stuff like that. Or like at feature when we're just trying to see, hey, maybe you've never worked in feature before. Your TV boards look really good. Can you try doing, this type of scene in like a quote unquote feature style?
Oh, that's so interesting. I feel like most of the tests I've taken are pretty straightforward. They'll just give you about a page, maybe 2 pages of script from the show that you're applying to, and they'll give you the reference, any reference you need, the character designs and the location designs, and then you pretty much just you get like a week or 2 to storyboard that page of the script, just to, I guess, kind of see what your work would look like if you were on the production, which is of course challenging because I do feel like there's a little bit of a learning curve in terms of drawing the characters and even getting to know the characters, especially if it's a brand new original show where you just really have no other frame of reference for the characters because you haven't seen any animatics. You haven't really spoken to much of the team about the story. So it's really just like what you're gleaning off of this one page of script and whatever context they choose to give you. So so I do find story tests challenging in that way. But yeah, I love those crazy creative prompts that you've been given, Natalie. Wow. I feel like the only other time it was in that vein for me was I was given an outline for something, so I had to come up with something funny for that scenario. But otherwise, it's been a little more straightforward. That's really fun. Do you think
that's a distinction between a show that's board driven, where you're going to be expected to like write jokes, write dialogue, and script driven? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's really fair to say. And I feel like that's something that hasn't come up yet. I don't think we've talked about in TV that there is a difference between script-driven shows or board-driven shows. I think they're also called outline-driven shows. But I can kind of give like a very simple rundown of that. For script-driven shows, it's what it sounds like. You're handed a script basically, and you do largely stick to that script, and you storyboard off of that. And for board-driven or outline-driven shows, the writers will just give you an outline pretty much of what the episode is about and what's going to happen in that episode. And then you pretty much come up with the dialogue and the gags, and the writers will come in and kind of like help write those things for you, but you are kind of partially writing yourself for that episode. And big caveat in that I have not personally worked on board-driven shows, so I might be getting some of the details wrong, but that's kind of my understanding of it. But yeah, I've only worked on script-driven shows so far, so I very much admire artists who are able to do the board-driven stuff, because that's a whole other part of the brain to exercise.
Man.
It's tough. Or it sounds tough.
We already touched a little bit about draftmanship, but one sort of follow-up nuance question to that is, how important is it to have an ability to match style on a show, and versus how important is it to have your own personal style? And are you able to sort of imbue your work with your personal style ever? And again, does that vary by project or production?
Yeah. Feature's very forgiving here again, because we are not outsourcing. You have a lot of leeway to draw in your own style. So when you're watching a screening of the movie in Storyboards, you can absolutely see the moment it switches from one board artist to the other, because they'll draw in a very different way. The important thing is not to be so off model that we get confused. So, like, you know, for example, if there's a cast of 3 characters, you try and recognize, like, okay, what's the way that you would tag each of them? Like, if 5 different people are going to draw Charlie Brown, how do you tag him? It's that black stripe across the shirt as the squiggly hair. If you have those 2 things, we know who you're talking about. So just like trying to see how everybody's tagging the characters and do the same thing, even if it's in your style. The one exception is if you are new, we don't have revisionists, but you might be more likely to get an assignment for someone else's boards that they're too busy to go back and do notes on. You might get that assignment. And in that case, you probably should try and draw like the person that you're fixing their boards on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's similar to what revisionists do. At least that was what I was told when I started out. I did start out as a revisionist at Disney TV, at least, and it was very, because it's a little jarring to kind of just like suddenly see one character that's drawn drastically differently than the rest of the panel, I guess. So so you do kind of want to like be a little bit of a chameleon as a revisionist, but and I think in TV it really again depends on what production you're on, how important it is to match the style. I do want to say that in my experience, it hasn't been a problem. I feel like I just draw the way I draw, and I do, I do have my personal kind of like shorthand or like symbols for each character just to make sure that they're recognizable. I think it's a lot more important to make sure they're on model in the sense that the sizing works out in the locations that they are, and then the sizing in comparison to the other characters, just to make sure that doesn't kind of cause any problems down the line. But otherwise, I haven't been told to really like change my style too much, but that just might be the shows that I've been on. I mean, I've heard shows like Family Guy are a little bit more strict with that, where they really do want you to be to draw exactly like the way it looks. I mean, that's just what I've heard. I'm not necessarily speaking from experience, but
I've never been on a show like that, but I've heard people talk about how it's kind of turned into almost keyframes for animation, right?
Yeah. That's what I heard as well. Yeah.
Great. So kind of rounding out this section for tips for breaking into the industry, we wanted to ask, how important are referrals or networking in general?
So I tend to say no amount of referrals can get you a job if your portfolio's not there, and no lack of referrals can keep you out if your skills are like so stunning. So the most important thing is to work on the skills and the portfolio. But if you're like in the middle of the pack, referrals can help for sure. We are so, like, story artists are so social. It does matter if you're nice to work with, if you're reliable, if you're collaborative and you take notes well. So if somebody's worked with you before and they can vouch for that, that can go a really long way. And I know it's tricky if you're like, I haven't worked yet. I'm looking for my foot in the door, and we're in a pandemic. How am I supposed to meet people? So I feel for the students right now. If at all possible, try and get coffee with people, or like if you can get a review from Rise Up Animation and meet somebody, like just do whatever you can to meet people who can say, oh yeah, I've met that person. They seemed really nice, you know?
Yeah, I feel like I couldn't have said it better myself. The portfolio is first and foremost the most important thing, but yeah, I feel like what happens more often is that you're more in the middle and you are qualified, but there are also hundreds of other people who are just as qualified as you, and that's really tough. And sometimes all it takes is somebody being like, oh, I really liked working with this person, or I got coffee with them once and they seemed super friendly and I feel like we can give them a chance. And I mean, that's a networking thing. That's somebody who knew you or has met you at some point, and they just kind of end up taking your portfolio out of the sea of portfolios and just like put it on top, for somebody to take a look at. And then that's to have somebody vouch for you for your personality and how well you collaborate with people is pretty powerful. So,
and can I just say, like, I used to think when I was like college age, I used to think networking means you have to network up. It's about meeting somebody important, and then they'll like open the gate for me. And a big discovery in my 20s was networking is really important to do sideways. Like, be nice to your fellow students, people in your classes. These are the people you'll be working with in a couple years. So like, make sure that you're making a good impression now. And like, it's really natural to feel competitive, but honestly, like those are the people who can pull you into a studio later. So you're networking sideways.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point because I feel like the few times that I have been able to get a job like through a friend's referral, it was always a friend. It was always a peer who I've either worked with before in school. So we've already collaborated together. We've already kind of gotten to know each other in that sense. It was, I don't think it was ever really, somebody who was in a greater position of power. That's really interesting. That's a great point.
It's almost just like becoming friends with basically make friends with people in college or wherever you are.
Work well with others.
And like, I mean, Katie Lowe might be your PA, and then she's like running animation at Disney a few years later. So be nice to everybody you meet. Be nice.
For sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
People like change positions over the years. They might be in a different department or a different studio. And I think I heard you guys say it. It's such a small industry. Don't burn bridges ever.
Oh my gosh, no.
Definitely.
Or even while you're in school, like your peers that you graduate with, if you're in school, I mean, you don't know who's going to end up in what position to kind of like maybe over here, they're looking for a story artist. Wait, I worked with somebody in school who's a great story artist, and I think she would be a great fit. So I don't know. You just never really know. So just be kind to everybody you meet.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
So now we were on to, let's be honest, the juiciest part of this. We're looking for that hot goss. Not really. I'm building it up too much now. But what are maybe some of the less desirable or least favorite parts of your jobs?
Man, I really want to continue working, so I'm scared to answer this.
Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
I guess like what we touched on this earlier, in story at Disney feature especially, like you do have some really nice power over the story. You get to comment on the script and propose ideas, and I've had an assignment where it was like, go off for a week with these other two board artists and just brainstorm what the end of our movie could be. Like, that's so cool. But at the end of the day, it's not your movie, and it's not up to you what the director ends up going with. So just like, I think a lot of us imagine that we are directors trapped in a story artist's body. And like, that's not actually really helpful for the project to have 12 people thinking they're the director. You have to remember what you're doing, which is making the best possible version of this director's vision, and that like that's going to make the best movie possible, not fighting them and, talking behind their back like, oh, they're so dumb, we should do this, right? Like it's not helpful. But like at the same time, oh my gosh, just the fact that you have to fall in love with every scene that you're doing because it is so much work. You have to put your heart into it and then pitch it as if like, oh, I really believe in this. This is my baby. And simultaneously be okay with them saying, that is really nice storyboarding. Good job. It doesn't work in this movie and we're going to cut it. And here's your next assignment. So like, I guess that's just like a really ironic part of the job. You really have to care about what you're doing and be willing to drop it immediately.
That's great. That's such a good lesson, I think, for anyone involved in any sort of creative pursuit. If you're, in TV or commercials or feature or video games, anything, I think everybody runs up against that. And it reminds me of, we were watching the Great British Bake Off the other day, and there was a contestant who was like really upset after a review, and they were like, oh, it's just so hard to work on something for 3 hours and then have it torn apart. We're like, 3 hours? Try like weeks and weeks or months. Like, come on. It's nothing. But
That's so funny. Yeah.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
Love to hear your thoughts now, Isabelle.
I mean, it's really interesting to hear that, because I feel like I experience it in a very similar way in TV, except that we don't even get the chance to really iterate, or we don't get a ton of say in the script. And I think one of the most frustrating things, at least to me, in my experience in TV, is that the writers and the story artists do seem to be pretty siloed off in separate areas. We don't get I would love the chance to kind of sit down with the writers when they're more in their kind of like outline phase and to kind of have a little bit of a say in that. And I was on one production where it was a little bit more collaborative. And I think as a result, that did end up being one of my favorite experiences in TV. So, I mean, maybe it's just me kind of like craving a little bit more of that in that kind of like feature-like experience, which is maybe why I'm changing directions in my career a little bit now. But I think that's kind of, for me personally, what's been a little bit frustrating. I do crave a little bit more collaboration, more room to kind of talk about story and have an input in kind of like the larger way things are written for the show itself, rather than just kind of on an individual episode level. Yeah, that's what I think.
So exciting! You're going to get to do that on your next project.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I think it's part of I mean, it's all very personal, right? But I feel like that's part of the reason I got into story. So, when kind of figuring out what career path you want to take, I think it is important to kind of reflect on what you personally like to do or what you most enjoy out of a job. And every job is going to kind of give you something different, and every job is going to come with its own unique hardships. And it's almost less about, at least the way I like to think about it, is that it's almost less about what you love to do the most, but more about what you're willing to suffer through the most in some ways. So if like in story, you like to think about that puzzle and you like to kind of throw things away and like do it again and approach it again in a different, from a different perspective, I think that's really cool. So that's how I like to see it.
Can I give an optional aside that I might totally mess up?
Yeah. Yes,
please.
Yes.
Okay. I don't remember who said this, and I want to give credit to the right person, but I don't remember. And it's a little bit crass, so you should cut this if it doesn't work. I remember somebody talking about, careers and what you should pick to do with your life. And they were saying that every job has its own shit sandwich. And like, depending on which one you pick, each one will have a different shit sandwich, but you should just find the shit sandwich that you don't really mind eating. So,
oh my gosh, I love that.
Can that be our Instagram quote?
Okay.
I feel like that's a funnier way of the way I just phrased it. A more fun way of thinking.
Yours is classy, Isabelle.
You know what? That is so great, though, because especially, I think all of us can relate to when you go into something that's not a quote unquote like normal profession where, we're making cartoons for a living. It's a ridiculous thing to do for a living.
Yeah.
You kind of think about it in such, especially when you're just starting out, I think you're encouraged to think about it in such rosy terms where it's like, oh, you're following your passion. It's every day is going to be this beautiful skipping through fields moment.
Your dream
and that could not
job.
be further from the truth, right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I love the idea that, your dream job is still a type of shit sandwich. It's just the kind you're okay with eating. I think that's ultimately, though a little crass, a much more constructive way of thinking about things. And I love that.
I've got another one for you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
please.
I'm sorry. One of the cartoonists I used to work with at Helioscope, Jeff Parker, said it's called artwork for a reason. There's work in it for a reason.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. At the end of the day, it really is still a job.
It is.
Still work.
All right, so after that last juicy question, we're going to have to bring us up a little bit, okay? So what are your favorite parts about your job, starting with Natalie?
Oh, so much. I really love this job. I loved comics, but I was frustrated a little bit. You thumbnail something and then you pencil it and then you ink it. And you go in Photoshop and you erase this pixel that's a little bit out of the line. And in storyboarding, it's like, I draw a different thing every day. It moves very quickly. And I get to just kind of get the idea out. It's a little more writing focused, which I enjoy that. It's social. I wasn't sure I'd be able to work in a team the way that we do because I was like a comic book artist. Working at home alone before that was common, and we all knew what that felt like. And it was, I thought maybe I don't have the social skills for this. And actually, I really love collaborating in the room. It's so fun. I have really great memories of Ralph Breaks the Internet, just feeling like I should be paying for this. Like I'm in a comedy show right now, like the writer and directors were so funny and we'd all just be like pitching dumb gags and laughing. It was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds so nice.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I love the most about it is the collaboration. I feel like I end up having my fondest memories on every project when I kind of like have those brainstorm sessions with my storyboard partner or anybody else around, and we just kind of joke about what might happen in the story, and sometimes we'll say the most ridiculous things and then bring it back down to reality. But that, I don't know, I end up laughing so hard, during any of those kind of just brainstorm sessions. And I feel like what I particularly love about storyboarding is that, I guess this applies to the whole process, but our job is to make people react emotionally to our characters, to the story. And I think because storyboard artists have to kind of put the whole thing together in this blueprint form, we do spend so much time thinking about how the whole thing works together and how we can elicit the best reactions out of the audience. So I kind of love that's the most important part of the job in so many ways. And which is funny because pitching is where you get that, but I don't like to pitch, so it's a little bit of a conundrum for me. But I feel like it does help me get over my anxieties for the pitch, because I'm like, well, if I did a good job, I get that really rewarding experience of people either laughing at the gags I've created or being sad in all the right moments, and just emotionally reacting. So I do love that.
Nice.
I have to imagine too that seeing your work kind of gone through other departments and then seeing the final result, that has to be rewarding. Like, maybe I'm just imagining that, but
absolutely. And you're like, oh wow, that's so much better now. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. I feel like in animation, collaboration isn't just bouncing ideas off of each other, but I love that it's about everybody who's like a master in their own discipline kind of comes together. And I'm like, oh, I'm terrible at color, but this person's just going to be incredible at taking, the work that I've done, the work that I've contributed to the project, and to do their thing to make that, to support like what I've done. And I think that's the coolest experience ever, seeing that come together.
Sorry, that sounded totally like I was trying to bait you guys into saying animation is really cool, but I actually just meant it from your perspective.
It is. Oh my gosh.
But guys, the best part is when we...
Yeah, like, I mean,
it's so cool to see it lit and stuff, but like, what about when it's animated?
For real, it's so cool. Like we're just doing broad strokes, right? Like one drawing for a whole acting choice, and then when you see like what an animator does to that, you're like, whoa, that's a real person with like thoughts in their head, like second to second now. Like how do you do that?
That's wild.
I'm sure you have
so
the
funny.
opposite situations, which we can cut out of the podcast, but I'm sure that the situations where you're
yeah.
oh, this is not what I intended, but interesting. But we can, that's very juicy. We can,
No, never. Animators are so
Sure,
cool.
right?
It's
answer.
normally better if it's different from what I boarded. It's normally a
I
good-
was gonna
good
say.
choice.
Aw.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I feel like I've had that experience where I'm like surprised at the choices that were made, but it's almost always in a good way. Where I'm like, oh, that's way better. Oh yeah, I like that acting choice. That
Yeah.
fits the character even better, or that made me even more sad in this moment where the intention was to make someone sad. But
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've had that experience, but it was always positive. So
Yeah.
I guess that's test
That
of a
is-
good director, like who's
Mhm.
shepherding the whole process.
yeah, to make
and
those decisions.
Make those decisions. Yeah, sorry, Ben.
No, I'm just thinking that's such a, gosh, what a great, I don't even know what I'm about to say. I don't know how to say it. I'm just thinking, what am I trying to say? There's a bit of humility in that, and also such a great, I mean, what more could you ask from like a collaborator where you're willing to say like, oh, that's different than I had thought, but I actually like it more. Like it sounds so basic but to you two, probably because you're used to doing it. But I certainly remember being a student where I thought, I'm not proud to admit, but like anything other than what I had originally envisioned was almost a challenge to what I had originally envisioned, and it was hard to come to terms with that it was like,
Yeah.
okay, I can still have value and be okay, even if my final idea isn't the final thing. And certainly as an animator working professionally has been a big lesson in that, where ultimately you're just looking for the best ideas and they can come from wherever. I'm just kind of rambling now.
No,
but
I
just
love
want to
that you
sing your
said that.
both of your praises a little bit. That that's kind of a skill in and of itself.
Well, I think everybody can relate to what you just said. I mean, it's so natural as an artist to feel like I did it this way for a reason. I care about this. Like, why would you change it? But I would say if you still have that impulse, it's okay. But that's what comics are for, like make a comic where there's no gatekeeper. There's nobody who comes after you. You can do exactly what you want, or make a tiny short that you control from start to finish. But the cool thing about working in a team is you can make something so much bigger, like so much more scope and reach so many more people. So that's kind of the trade-off. And you can have both. You can make like a super indie project in your free time if you really want to retain like auteurship of it.
And just because your ideas kind of don't end up getting used doesn't mean that wasn't a very vital part of the process to arrive at the final product. Because
Good point.
if people see something, they're like, okay, that's an interesting way to do the acting in this scene. But, I'm going to use that as a jumping off point and then animate it the way I feel like might be a better choice for this character. They wouldn't have come to that conclusion necessarily without the jumping off point of the boards. So, I mean, it's very much part of the process.
I've heard in feature, people have said we're trying to reach the dead ends as quickly as possible. So even if you board something that doesn't work, like the director knows, okay, we've been down that path. It doesn't work. So I guess we should go this way. It is helpful. Just I'm repeating what you said, Isabelle.
Totally
You're right.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no, but I like
That's
looking
great.
at, I like seeing it as like dead ends. I think that's, I don't know, that it's a great metaphor to use.
Yeah.
That's great. Gosh,
Amazing.
great stuff.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to our next section, which is listener questions. A little while back, we put out a call on social media for questions, and as always, you all delivered. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone who took the time to submit questions. We unfortunately don't have time to answer every single question we had, but we hope that most of the questions that came up will have been answered throughout this episode. So moving into this, we'll have each of you, Isabelle and Natalie, alternate questions and answers in the interest of time, but feel free to chime in whenever, if anything pops up organically that you'd like to discuss.
Awesome. So the first question we will direct to Isabelle, which is from @Moonium, I believe is the Instagram handle.
Perfect.
And the question is, how do you balance creativity for work and creativity for yourself. Do you have any tips on not getting burnt out? And also related to this question is another listener question from @KoalaDev0301. Is there a work-life balance in story?
That's a really great question. And I feel like work-life balance and personal creativity outside of work is something that I don't want to say struggle with, but actively work on kind of every day as I move through my career. But I have almost always found that I need to have something creative going on outside of work that isn't related to that doesn't belong to the company I work for. That's something that's just all for me. And I find that it just kind of keeps me excited and gay and engaged and learning all the time, especially in a field where it's important to kind of keep learning and keep that inspiration up and that motivation up. So, but there's also balancing that with the very real possibility of getting burnt out if you kind of overload yourself with too many projects. So I try to keep it really low pressure in order to avoid burnout. I kind of really try to listen to when I'm feeling excited about something and then like jumping on that and spending time with my personal projects if I feel that spark or excitement. But if I'm genuinely feeling tired, I really do try to not force myself to do anything or push myself too much to create just for the sake of creating. So it's a little bit of a balance, and I think it's a little bit of, about paying attention to how you're feeling and being honest with yourself about how you're feeling, because I feel like especially with the presence of social media in our art world, there's this kind of unspoken peer pressure to keep creating and to show that you're always creating. And I don't know. I think that's something that's important to have discussions about and to be honest with yourself about. Like, don't push yourself to do something just for the sake of doing it. Do it because you really want to, or you want to learn a new skill, or you want to practice something. And then in terms of the question of work-life balance, I feel like there can be a work-life balance, but it's really, it's difficult. It's really up to you. I think it's really up to where you set your own boundaries. And I do think it also depends on not necessarily the studio, but more specifically the production that you're on. Some productions are just a lot tougher and they demand a lot more out of you depending on who's leading the project. And I've worked on some that just left me entirely exhausted at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and I just had zero motivation to create anything. And I kind of just let that happen. But then I try to make sure that if this is unsustainable for myself, I do try to make moves to maybe go in a different direction if I can, if I have the ability to, if I have the, privilege to choose. That's a reality as well. And I feel like I could talk about this forever, but I don't want to go on rambling too much. But I think, in terms of work-life balance, it's really, what you about what boundaries you set for yourself.
That's very well said. I think, especially just that sometimes you have to take an active role in that. It's not necessarily just don't take it for granted that it will be balanced for you. Sometimes it's a very active thing.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm so glad you said that.
So the next question is for Natalie, and this is from @SnooThomas0. Question is, could you become a director from being a story artist?
Yes, that is how a lot of directors at Disney, that was their path. I think it's important to say that not every story artist becomes a director, and a lot of people want to be directors. So, sometimes it can be a bit of a turnoff when someone is brand new in a studio and they're already walking around like that's owed to them. Like I have seen that, and that's not necessarily great, but it is definitely possible. And I would say Story is in a privileged position where we have exposure to directors. We spend so much time with them. We're on a first name basis. Other departments would kill for that kind of a connection. And that makes it easier to network with them and ask them questions, take them to coffee, and just kind of learn like, what is the job and do I want to do that?
There's a kind of a part two to this question, which I'd be curious to ask you both. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of like a student listener who's never pitched in a story room or something like that. And maybe they are new to kind of navigating like the hierarchies of the story team and working with the director. And I guess the short version of my question is, what is story room etiquette, and what advice would you give to someone who's brand new and entering the story room for the first time? And like, do you raise your hand when you talk, and things as basic as that?
Okay, I'll take that one. So on the feature side, it's a great question, Katie, and you've been in the story room before, so you know what this is like. Yeah, I never want to tell somebody to be quiet or like not say something if you see something. Like you should, and if you feel confident enough to do that, that's great. But there is something to being new in the room and just observing for a while, because your first job is learning the culture of this unique story room that could be very different from any story room you've been in before. Your first job is learning, who is this director? What are their tastes? Is there anything that's off limits in this room? Like, are there boundaries, or, is this like super like balls to the wall, nobody repeats what is said in this room? So it's good to sit back a little bit at first and just listen, and dip your toe in the water as you start speaking. But eventually they're going to need your brain and your voice and your opinions. So it's good to get comfortable and start diving in, even though it's scary and not all of your ideas will be taken. That's normal and it's okay. Try not to interrupt people. It can be hard if there's 15 people in the room around the table and they're all pretty vocal, like it could get that way in the Ralph room. You kind of have to like step on the end of somebody's sentence to get in there. But yeah, like also crediting people. Like if you're boosting something that someone else said, be like, yeah, I loved what Nancy said, and then you repeat it. So like you're making sure to just like amplify where the idea came from.
That's a great point.
So I guess, does that answer your question, etiquette?
Yeah, I think that was all super valuable information. Thank you so much.
Sure.
It's almost like the soft skills kind of being in that room and what that means to people. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I also always love the concept of the compliment sandwich, which I feel like is always used a lot. So if you want to vocalize a critique, it's kind of great to talk about what works, then say your piece, and then end it with like something positive again. I feel like that helps. I feel like it's not, it's not pointless to bring up what works also.
That's good.
But it does the job of making, everyone feel good about something, but then you have your piece, and it puts people kind of in a mood, I feel like, to be a little bit more collaborative. Nice. So I like the compliment sandwich.
and we always clap after somebody pitches, like no matter how it was taken, even if it's scrapped, like you always go up afterwards and be like, hey, great pitch, great job. I love how you did, XYZ. And don't be on your phone while someone's pitching.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, no.
That's brutal.
That's good. Good to know for sure.
All right. So our next question is from @FSEPW. Natalie, do you have any advice regarding how to board a personal project from ground zero? Basically, if it has no script or anything, it's just an idea in your head. Do you have any practical advice for that?
Yeah. So I guess if you already have an idea, then just start. I would say just start sketching in a sketchbook. Don't feel like you have to storyboard it yet. Whatever method works for you for idea generation, use it. Like for me, it's sketching in my sketchbook, moments, character designs. And those kind of gradually build on each other and turn into, story moments, a story, a bit of a story. You could also be typing it up in a Word document. Sometimes I do that. Whatever works for you is okay. I have a feeling at FSEPW, and I apologize if I'm misinterpreting this, but I feel like maybe the question is, where do you get your ideas from, which is different. Like if you're staring at a blank page and you need an original idea for a story sample for your portfolio.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And in that case, like it can come from anywhere. Those cafe sketches that we were talking about earlier, if you see something in real life that's really, an interesting character moment, like, the interaction between these two people, challenge yourself to imagine, where were they before they came in here and I saw them? Where are they going after I'm seeing them? Just try and expand it a little bit and challenge your brain to start making stories out of what you're seeing. When I'm driving in LA and somebody cuts me off, for example, I'm like, well, maybe they're a jerk, or maybe they're on their way to the hospital because like their wife's about to give birth, like try and like what else could be going on here? You can take a story from your family, like the story of how your grandma immigrated to the US or how your parents met, anything that's like an interesting story that and exaggerate it. And you can Google online writing prompts because writers get stuck on this too and they need to practice. Google writing prompts. There's a million starts of stories or just like concepts that you can springboard off of and make them your own.
That's great advice.
Those are wonderful suggestions.
That's awesome.
What I heard from that was that see life through a storyboard artist's eyes, right? When somebody's mean to you, it's just part of a bigger story.
It takes the sting out of it. Yeah, when somebody's a jerk, you're like, well, maybe something's going on at home. I don't know.
Okay, so this next question is from @mixpix_art, and this is for Isabelle. Any advice for high schoolers who want to be story artists in the future?
That's a great question. I feel like I have so much to say about that because that's such an early stage, and it's a stage where I feel like in high school I didn't know I wanted to pursue art professionally, so I kind of have to think about it in the framework of like, what would I have done? And part of it is like, I would have tried to draw a lot more every day, I think. I would have tried to start getting really comfortable with drawing from life and sitting down in a cafe and drawing really quickly and trying to capture an idea or a storytelling moment or a character moment, kind of practice that skill set. And just get consistent with your drawing routine, because it's about that kind of like 10,000 hours concept where, or what is it, 10,000 bad drawings, where, the concept is that every artist has 10,000 bad drawings in them. And the earlier you get started and get all those bad drawings out there, the better you'll get. And the point is obviously that you're just supposed to draw a lot. But that being said, I feel like in high school, it's still so early that you can just make sure to still have fun with your art. Really lean into the stuff that you like to draw, because I feel like when I was growing up, taking these kind of more traditional art classes, part of what ended up, I guess, discouraging me from going down a professional art route was because most teachers didn't like the fact that I really like to draw dragons or fantasy creatures in my art classes every day. And I feel like that kind of really didn't do me any favors as an artist, because it kind of made me feel like that wasn't what a professional artist should be doing. But that being said, those teachers, like, they weren't involved in the animation industry. I feel like they had a very narrow-minded view of what a professional artist looks like. So to me, in my head, they drilled into my head that a professional artist is just somebody who kind of sits in the studio all day and draws what we see in these like really fancy art galleries. And that was just not something I wanted to do. So I ended up kind of like really ignoring that and not realizing that was an option for me. So I feel like it's just so important at that age in high school to just kind of have fun with your work, explore what you like to draw. Don't worry about what studios might like to see at this point. Discover your own voice and play with it as much as you want, really. And yeah, I mean, just get comfortable with drawing all of those things. So
That's amazing.
I don't know. I think in high school, that's just a really fun time to play and to nurture that side of your art.
That's so real, Isabelle.
That's amazing.
That's a great
I'm
answer.
glad I'm not the only one. I think about that a lot in high school, just being made fun of for drawing dragons.
Yeah.
That's not real.
I had a history teacher call me out in front of the whole class because, I doodle in the margins, and he was like,
Right.
I was drawing bad anime heads with giant eyes, and he, in front of the whole class, was like, why do you keep drawing aliens in my class? Like, what are these?
Oh my gosh.
Gosh,
Oh. There's no quicker way to squelch, the creative mind than to just shame them for what they like to draw.
Well, you guys sure showed them.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
You should email them individually.
So I'd be so interested to see how common this is, because I remember in 5th grade too, my teacher holding up my math sheet that had doodles in the side, and it's like, this is not the place for this kind of thing.
Oh my gosh.
Like, oh,
Wow.
man.
You too.
Wowza.
Wow.
5th grade. That's
Well,
so
look at
young
that.
to shame a kid for drawing? What?
Thank you, Natalie. I agree.
Wow.
All right, so our next question is for Isabelle. This is from @DonVipatel 1806. What are some of your best art of books? What are your favorite recommendations?
Okay, so I have too many art of books, so it's a tough question to answer. I feel like a lot of it is also just personal taste. There's so many really good ones out there, and it's really up to you and what inspires you the most. The ones that I've loved the most are, I really like the Tangled art of book. Maybe because I worked on Tangled the series for a little bit, so I had a lot of fun kind of like browsing through Glenn Keane's beautiful drawings for that. I also really love the Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon art of books because I love Nico Marley's character design work. I think it's just stunning.
It's great.
Lilo and Stitch is a personal favorite of mine in terms of Disney movies, and I really, really love Chris Sanders' work, as well as Dean DeBlois. Is it DeBlois or is
I think it's DeBlois.
I don't know.
DeBlois?
DeBlois?
if it's DeBlois, if he pronounces it in the French way, I guess.
But yeah, his work's great.
But yeah, so I really love the Lilo and Stitch art of book. And then more recently, I've been looking through the storyboards for the movie Parasite, which has been a lot of fun. I really like that one. So those are some of my recommendations.
That's awesome.
So this next question is from @TheMiserableRoamer, which I hope you're not actually miserable, but I do love that name. I don't know why. For Natalie, what things held you back from improvement when you were a beginner and intermediate level?
Well, the miserable roamer. It was being afraid to say out loud that I was pursuing a job in story. I was afraid to tell anybody that that was my goal because I thought I would look ridiculous. I was mid to late 20s, no experience in animation, no animation degree. And I saw, 21-year-olds landing those jobs that I wanted. And I thought, I'm going to pursue this, but secretly, because I don't want to look foolish. And when I finally said out loud to somebody, this is kind of a secret, don't tell anybody, but I want to work in animation. And I don't know if that's a crazy pipe dream. He immediately was like, oh, I know someone that you should get coffee with. And it really started the wheels rolling. So it's scary because, nobody wants to fail publicly. And especially if you're, and 20s isn't that old, but it felt old. It felt like I'd missed the boat and I didn't want to look ridiculous. But that's really when things started picking up quickly for me. And I got in contact with relevant people and started my network and got connected with the resources I needed. It was telling people what I was going for and being vulnerable. So I hope that can help.
Yeah.
That's great.
Man, that was a great answer.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we are moving on to our last listener question for this section, which is from @Gamara Art Design. And they asked, process, scribble on script, ? Post-its then roughs, ? In other words, what is your process? And anything unique there to discuss?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually always thumbnail on the script, and because I kind of have a limited time in TV, I use the thumbnails on the script as an opportunity that's just basically my first pass of boards, because then I edit myself as I go into Storyboard Pro and I start roughing it out. And I'm not sure if other storyboard artists in TV do this, but I try to avoid the computer entirely for the first 2 days after a handout, because I do really like to sit with the script. I do really like to try to get a sense of my sequences kind of as a whole, and the best way I can do it is to really just look at the script, because it forces me to draw very tiny, because there's not a lot of room on the margins of the script, and I really keep it to very simple, like here's a little blob and here's the little arrow of where they're going to go. And it just kind of forces me to think really, really broadly, because once you get into the computer and you start roughing it out, I think, as has been mentioned before, there is a real tendency to start animating things and making things look really pretty, because it feels a little bit more final. And so the earlier in the process where I can kind of like feel like there's, there are more steps until the final thing, and like trick my brain into keeping it kind of rough and simple, the better it works for me, actually. And then so by like day 2 or 3, I'll start storyboarding on the computer. So yeah, I try to keep it as rough as possible in the beginning, but I do have to move pretty fast. So sometimes the roughs is all I can get to anyway. So yeah.
Awesome. Actually, let's pose that to Natalie too. I'm curious to see if
me too.
Individual differences.
Similar. I think you brought up a really important point, which is that the thinking up front is so important. You can't just dive in. No matter how crunched your schedule is, that time is such a good investment to think through it, read the script a few times, and maybe do like an overhead map of where things are and how you're going to stage it.
Yeah.
Because if you just start boarding, you panic and you just start with panel 1 and you start going, you can board yourself into a corner and like waste your time with something that doesn't end up working.
Right.
Yeah. I really like that advice, Isabelle. Oh, I've got a tip from Dave Pimentel, who I think he was head of story on Moana. I'm ashamed I don't remember that off the top of my head, but amazing story artist and director. he gave a talk to our story department, and he was like, the way that he starts a scene is he reads the scripts all day for a day, he thinks about it overnight, and then he starts scribbling on the script anything that he can see. Like, you know, when you read through it, some things are more visual to you, like they're clear immediately. So that's a good starting point. If you can already see it, it normally means it's strong in the script, and the parts of the script that are not strong are going to be harder. And he tries to distill the whole scene into one image. So he was issued the scene in Moana where she meets Maui on the island. She's shipwrecked, and there's a moment where she tells him, here's who I am, here's what you're going to do. And she like points an oar at him in his face, this giant guy. And that was the first thing that he drew. He's like, that's the image that summarizes this whole scene. It's that moment. So if you can find a moment like that, we call that a tent pole, you can hang everything else off of that. You know that you have to board up to that moment and then out of that moment. So that's like your guiding light for that scene.
I love that.
I like that, right? As a place to start, it makes it a little less scary.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I feel like I do a little bit of a version of that if I'm feeling like I don't know where to start. I try to find the emotional high point, at least, the point that I want to really get to in the scene or sequence. So I like that really resonates.
Emotional high point. I like that. I'm not sure I've been thinking about it like that, but that sounds like a really smart way to think about it.
It's just a way, like, if you're a little, like, lost and overwhelmed. It can be so overwhelming, like, getting something. There's just so much information, and it's just hard to find a place to start. But there's usually at least one moment where you're like, I think, like, this part is kind of the most important part to kind of get to, and everything else should kind of serve that or service that.
Yeah. Every scene should have a turn, right? Like there should be a big shift in the character or the mood or the plot. And there isn't always.
Yes, that's true. And those are usually the trickier things to board.
Yeah. When a scene is like really solid in the script, it makes your job easier.
Yeah.
But we have to board it either way.
Man, I feel like I'm learning so much. And that I should apply that exact concept to every shot I do too. Like I usually do go through a period of visualizing and shooting reference. Some people thumbnail. I'm not like so much into thumbnailing, but I feel like that's a really cool way to think about an animation too, is like, what is the big pose that I want to hit or something like that. Nice. So one pose that speaks for the rest of the shot or emotion or emotional high point. That's really cool.
All right, so this is the part of the podcast where we're going to ask both Isabelle and Natalie to give us a little animation tip. Although in this case, this special episode, we're going to ask specifically for a storyboarding tip. So this can be anything from a really practical, quick kind of thing that you recommend doing, or it can be more philosophical. So I think we're going to kick it off with Isabelle first with her tip.
Yeah, so I guess I just have a small little tip, but something that I've learned and I really recommend doing is before getting into a new sequence with any new characters that you might not have drawn before, I would really recommend spending a good amount of time trying to figure out your shorthands for those characters. So a shorthand is, I would say, a quick and simplified way of drawing any character in a storyboard, something that doesn't necessarily include every single detail from the design. But once you kind of get really comfortable drawing your characters and getting that out of the way early on, it won't impede in your storyboarding process kind of down the line as you're trying to figure out maybe a difficult design. So the more time you spend before getting into the storyboarding process, with getting to know those characters and practicing how to draw them really quickly and finding a shorthand for those characters, I think the more it'll kind of reward you down the line where it doesn't impede your thinking. That's my tip.
That's great.
Love that.
It's awesome.
I guess mine would be whenever you get stuck or you're like kind of feeling a little bit burnt out or whatever, just utilize your friends. Get up. If you're in the studio, get up, walk over to your friend's cubicle and say, hey, can I show you what I'm working on? Or if you're stuck at home or you're trying to break in or you're a student or whatever, try and show what you're doing to somebody that you like, a friend or family member or somebody you trust, because it really tends to shake loose any ideas that were stuck, just to get out of your own head for a minute and talk to somebody else.
Love
That's
that.
great.
Yeah.
Love that.
So before we get to the ending, we first wanted to give both Isabelle and Natalie a chance to say if there's anything you'd like to plug, or how could our listeners find you or follow you? Not in a weird way, but in a very
Don't follow me.
very normal.
Don't find me.
So I don't really have anything other than an Instagram, and my handle on Instagram is Isa Sketchbook, ISA Sketchbook, basically. And other than that, I actually have a little Etsy shop where I do little illustrated bookmarks, and I'm
nice.
very proud of it. I love it. I have a lot of fun drawing dragons. I get to live my dreams drawing dragons all day
nice.
and selling little bookmarks. So all of that can be found on it's connected to my Instagram. So
Nice.
Cool. I'm also most active on Instagram. I'm at Tallychick, TALLYCHYCK. And I made a book a couple of years ago called I Moved to Los Angeles to Work in Animation. It's an illustrated guide to, guess what, how I moved to Los Angeles to work in animation. And it's part, autobio, self-indulgent, my story, part how to do that if you're interested in doing that too. And that's from Boom Comics. And yeah, watch Short Circuit on Disney Plus. My short Exchange Student is episode 2. Thanks so much for having us, you guys.
Oh
yeah,
my gosh,
thank you.
Of course, thank you for
It was
coming on.
fun.
This was
Guys
such
have
a great
given
episode. I'm so sure that it was going to greatly benefit all of our listeners. Like, I think a huge portion of our listeners are in stories. So, yeah,
for sure.
this will be
Definitely.
a great one. So thank you both so much. As we round out the episode, we'll remind our listeners to also follow us on social media, which again, we are actually also most active on Instagram. So our handle is at, oh my God, what is it? Is it at Animation Happy Hour or is it at Anim Happy Hour?
I think it's Animation Happy Hour.
Oh my gosh, I've had too many
We
darkened
Absolutely
stories.
need to keep this in. 100% know what our
I'm blanking. I've been
I'll tell you
trying
right-
to
oh, I'm in.
follow the work-life balance
That's right.
edict and haven't been on it so much lately.
Animation Happy Hour.
Okay,
Animation Happy
thank
Hour.
you,
Perfect.
Garrett. And you can also, please, if you feel so inclined, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We've been getting some really lovely reviews lately. Thank you so much
Yeah.
to those of you who took the time. It really means a lot to us to get your feedback and know that you're enjoying and listening to the podcast. And lastly, we'll give another shameless plug for our virtual tip jar where you can donate to us and become our patron. So we're very, very thankful for that. And that reminds me that we actually received our very first tip that was not from my dad. So thank you so much to Jabron McDoom, I believe was the name. Correct me if I'm wrong, but thank you so much, Jabron. We really, really appreciate you. And thank you.
All right, I think that about wraps up the episode. This has been Garrett.
Katie.
Ben.
Isabelle.
And Natalie, thanks for listening and
Happy
Happy
story.